What are the dangers of the future? Will ours be a future we control, or do we face some mix of pitfalls and highs? Or might there come a time through the development of general artificial intelligence where we are no longer in control at all? These are the questions that will face human civilization in the coming decades and centuries, though perhaps sooner rather than later. We are already seeing some of the changes, the precursors to what might be a growing storm of technological development. We are seeing things like YouTube blossom in a rapidly changing media, but we're also seeing other positive changes in such fields as biotechnology and the exploration of space, where the human future now seems closer as far as colonizing the solar system than it has since the end of the Apollo era. Predicting how that future will unfold is impossible, but you can speculate about hypothetical technologies of which primitive forms are already here, but also those that seem possible, but just beyond our current grasp. My guest today envisions just those things, within a framework of what we could eventually do, or for that matter anyone else that might be out there in the depths of space could do, to give some idea of what the human future might be like.
Welcome to Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. Joining John today is longtime friend Isaac Arthur, host of Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur on YouTube. A physicist and a futurist, Isaac explores the possibilities of the future of humanity on his channel, and also speculative looks at what alien civilizations might be like, science fiction, and of course, explorations of the solutions to the Fermi paradox.
And we're joined now with Isaac Arthur for the second part of our conversation. I've always found space elevators to be dangerous myself because they seem wide open to terrorism and, the realities of planet Earth. But do you think we're ever going to do that? Do you think we're going to build a space elevator?
If we get a material that we can realistically mass manufacture, they're going to handle the stresses, I could see it. But from my perspective, if you get one that's cut off, like if I cut one off 80 miles up, where somebody shoots it with a missile, that space elevator is going to fly off into space and the bottom part's going to fall down. It's going to get air drag and it's just going to hit like a bunch of wire falling from a normal tower. So not very dangerous in that respect. But the problem with the space elevator is that it's relatively low throughput. You can't really, that's a very long track. That's thousands of kilometers of track. And you can't actually put that much mass on that at the same time, nor can you accelerate an object all that fast up there too, because that's dragging out when you do that. I think what you'd see again, and we talk about them a lot, is the orbital ring, because that one is just right above the atmosphere. If it does fall down, it's going to land at about 100 miles an hour. And your tethers only have to be 100 miles long to reach the thing. So it is, it's well inside what we could do for something that is very strong, that you could put lots of cargo on. Now, would we have space elevators with those if we had the material for them? Oh, probably. But I don't see them being the workhorses of the space lift.
What do you think the workhorse will be?
Orbital ring with a shorter tether to it. But that's way down the road. That's one of those things where it's not that it's all that technologically sophisticated. It's that you need to. It's like the railroad tracks. When you're sending settlers out to Oregon, you don't build a railroad to get them there. You build the railroad later when there's already towns up there. So your orbital rings, when you're late stage development's like a subway. You're not going to build a subway from Cleveland to Chicago when both these are little villages. You wait until you've got a big development. And to me, the orbital ring is one of those things that you build probably about at least a few generations after you've got a serious orbital infrastructure.
Now, it's interesting that you made that comparison with founding towns out west, because that comparison has been made recently by Elon Musk and SpaceX, that they're going to build the Union Pacific Railroad to Mars and found a Mars colony. There isn't a town there yet. How realistic do you think that the SpaceX plan is?
Elon Musk He does seem to be one of those people that people either love him or they hate him. To me, he's a lot like Edison or Tesla in the sense that he's very much a big one for ideas and getting people enthusiastic. And I do think some of the time those ideas are a little bit unrealistic, but at the same time, I didn't think the reusable rocket thing was going to work out. And so, maybe he's right and it will be like that. I never find any of his ideas to be too far-fetched. I think you just push the envelope a little bit on the enthusiasm for him. He's a very good salesman for them, but at the same time, he has made it happen sometimes too. I am never going to get on people for dreaming big. And do I think that's what's likely to happen? No, but it is inside the window of reality. It's not like he's talking about building space colonies on Alpha Centauri tomorrow or something like that. He's talking about maybe doing a Mars colony or a base in a decade or so. And he's laying out a technological foundation for that. And we've got the tech to go to Mars. I think you had Rob Zubin on a couple of weeks ago, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Case for Mars back in the 90s when everyone had forgotten about Mars and the moon for a while. Tells you it's the blueprint for how you do it with the technology you got then. Obviously, we do it a little bit better now, but it was viable right then. That is a completely functional way to get to Mars. I don't like to send small groups on things like that. I tend to feel that when you're doing this, you don't go there to plant a flag and collect rocks. You build a permanent base there. So you have to upscale that for my approach, but it works. And if you can get the enthusiasm, if you can get people willing to do it, then we can do it you couldn't do it tomorrow. It takes a little bit of time to build the stuff up, but we can do it, yeah. I mean, it's like building a bridge. It's very expensive, but if you're willing to invest in it, then you can do it.
I think Elon Musk's main contribution to human civilization is thinking big. Just simply saying, okay, here's how you think big, so that eventually you get other people thinking in the same grain as Musk, and soon you have 20 Elon Musks, founding companies and things like that. I think that's his major contribution is humans. This is how to think big.
It's so easy for people to forget. What was it, Meg? When we fired the space shuttle, and there was no replacement coming on. For many of us, that was like, oh crap, it's going to be decades before we can yes, we will still do this one day. Probably with better technology, it'll be cheaper and safer, but we're gonna have to wait now. No replacement for the space shuttle is the end of NASA. And then somebody comes by and says, we can actually do this without all of that. We don't have to replace the shuttle. We can do the reusable rocket thing. And, without companies willing to do that, without things like SpaceX, we'd still be sitting there in the 2000s waiting for the newest NASA space shuttle design to maybe get funded. And people forget that. And, for me, Musk, whatever else, just for doing that goes down in my book as a great guy. And we need more people like him. We need more people to dream big. We got to be realistic, of course, but we need to dream big. You don't ever get to the top of the mountain unless you want to try.
Well, exactly. And I think with Elon, I did not think SpaceX would work. When they first started it up, I thought, no way are they going to be able to compete with Lockheed and Boeing.
Yeah, that's it. That is literally the reason why I always give them the benefit of the doubt when he talks big these days is I didn't think SpaceX was going to fly either, but, it did. It did.
And he's actually said that it wouldn't have had. He had one more failure in the early stages of the rockets. Yeah. One more failure, he would have been sunk. But he got lucky, and he seems to have gotten lucky ever since. And all of a sudden, here he is dropping launch costs like you wouldn't believe. And I gave up all skepticism with him when I saw him land a rocket stage. Yeah. When I saw
that clip so many times, if that had been a piece, they would have blown out.
The one I watch a lot is Falcon Heavy with the dual landing. I'm like, oh man, because I just didn't think that it was. I knew it was
possible. I knew it could happen one day, but I kept expecting something to go wrong. And there were a lot of companies that tried that. They never got off the ground, and they certainly never landed back on the ground. And there was some luck involved in that, to be sure. But it's. Think positive. Always be realistic. We say plan for the worst and hope for the best. That way you're always pleasantly surprised. But you do have to be willing to actually to roll the dice. You got to be willing to think big and try. And that is folks get out there and they say, well, the future's going to be awful, things like that. And on the channel, on my channel, we try to paint a slightly more optimistic picture. But I never think of it as optimistic because we do bring up the problems, the challenges, but you have to look at the future and say, here are some good things that can happen. You can't always say, oh, this is going to fall apart. This isn't going to work. You got to be willing to actually try the stuff out. And Musk, in my book, is always going to be a great guy for having done that.
Yeah, indeed. And I would actually credit going back to science fiction, I would actually credit the sci-fi authors, the early ones, the Heinlein and Asimov and Clarke and
Campbell, the whole lot of those guys.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, obviously a lot of stuff they were doing was basically space westerns, laser guns in space. But at the same time, they painted, we always say this with the channel is science fiction leads to science else, then inspires someone to write science fiction, then inspires more science, then inspires somebody else to write something else. And it's a feedback. And that feedback loop of the arts and the sciences is what results in human progress.
Yeah, very much so. And now add YouTube channels to that because we do exactly that.
Yeah,
and
you have to change your medium.
Yep. And video games, you have to add video games.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything is.
I remember playing Alpha Centauri. Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri gave me an extra love for space. Although I was joking because I just did that live stream yesterday, and folks were commenting on the background I had there, and I was like, "That's your Wookiee." And I remember watching the old Ray Bradbury Presents one from the '80s. Do you remember that show at all?
Oh yes.
They'd always did the startup by looking around his room. He says, "I just look around to see what to write about." And I said, "Well, that's kind of what you do here. You got your studio set up where you write, and you need those little inspiration things that make you think. And most stuff you have in your backdrop for a show is there to be seen, but not so much by you. But you start noticing how it affects your writing because there are things you glance around at, and that's what reminds you, here's a whole new thing to think about again. And, I do look, I've got all sorts of space outline around the house, and I do look at that, and that is where that takes your mind to the places where you write about for the science. And, it's that feedback loop.
Right. And Bradbury himself actually never called himself a science fiction author. He said, no, that's not what I am. And because he did such varied stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously hard sci-fi wasn't his area, but he.
No, although the Martian Chronicles, for the time,
For the time.
He was a composer to, not to knock Edgar Rice Burroughs, but, I can't remember what that's called. John Caudle.
Yeah.
Obviously not the hardest to science fiction there. But obviously sci-fi had a bad reputation for a long time. I was growing up was the gutter thing for like comic books that people read. It was for teenagers. Now it has a much cleaner reputation because everybody grew up and kept reading it. But is Bradbury a sci-fi writer? I'd say, yes, that would be how I'd define him. But he did do a lot of the genres. Asimov will always be remembered for Foundation robots, but he wrote tons of science books, tons of non-science, non-fiction stuff too. And I don't think anyone should ever feel constrained to their genre. Whenever you're doing something creative, and it's the same as what we did. I did a YouTube channel as a new chance for a new medium to work in. And maybe something's going to replace YouTube one of these days. I'll try that out. Try something, have hobbies. Never be myopic. Always spread yourself out to many different things. It's what keeps you from getting stuck in a box.
It's essential. And it, there will come a time when YouTube is old hat and disappears.
Oh, yeah. Silent film, you
Yes, it becomes like GeoCities, where everybody was putting up unicorn GIFs, and that was really cool. And then all of a sudden, it's gone.
AOL discs. So many coffee coasters that way. It is. As you get older, you start remembering little bits of technology. We were talking about typewriters earlier. The medium does change, but a lot of them still stick around. I was saying, TV killed the radio star, but no, radio's still around. And, they're saying, the internet will kill off news networks. Say, well, they'll have to adapt, but they'll still be there. The medium changes, but a lot of stuff sticks around. And I would tend to assume there's always going to be something like YouTube out there. But people forget the point of YouTube originally was for individual people to be able to upload their random stuff, their personal photos for a small audience. The entire importance of channels like ours, of channels really, period, that wasn't what was in mind. That this was something like Facebook where you could upload your personal home videos. And out of that emerged channels. That was the first change in the medium. Same as, place like Netflix or Hulu, when it started off as showing reruns of shows and things like that, now they produce their own. And so the medium evolves, right? And it changes with time too, but there's always going to be a place for people to upload their own videos to, I should think.
I can't imagine there wouldn't be, because that's a ubiquitous part of life now for most people, with phones having cameras and everything. Yeah. And it's been that way for a while.
Always the one that I either say, have you ever been wrong about predictions? And my big one is always text messaging. I never believed text messaging would take off. The smartphone thing entirely has surprised the heck out of me. I always thought it'd be like micro laptops you strapped onto your arm with a keyboard you typed in. So
I did not expect that either. And thinking about the cell phone revolution, essentially, we're both pushing middle age. I'm past middle age. I'm 42, and I think you're 38, something like that.
26.
26. Yes, I am 19. We literally watched the human race addict itself to a brain prosthetic. Mm-hmm. That is what a cell phone is. And I watched it unfold. And life is fundamentally different on that level now that people have phones than it was when, people were using flip phones or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just young enough to remember the entire computer thing getting started. I remember when Weird Science came out, was it like 1986? And, PCs, Nintendo, the old NES that came out in the 80s, that was a big deal, the Atari, things like that. And to live through that age, it's such a change. And I was thinking how people in the 80s must feel about a lot of this technology when to them the phone was still a pretty, there were folks around who still remember when phone lines were a real thing. And I remember when answering machines were an extreme rarity. Now, you always went, and it changes the culture, right? Back in the day, you always answered the phone if it rang. You'd interrupt a conversation to go answer the phone. Everyone expected you to. And I said, that's going to drive people nuts with the cell phone. And it did. And eventually we get a new cultural attitude towards it where you only answer the phone unless it rings, somebody calls you back and it's clearly important. Otherwise, you just ignore it or shut it off while you're talking to people. Yeah,
it's amazing to think. I mean, I still have my original Commodore 64 and it still works. Wow. And it's like, this computer is nothing compared to a modern computer. I mean, absolutely nothing. Yet there also seems to be a nostalgia for this stuff forming up where people want to go back and play these NES games and everything from the past. Maybe because there's something human about them. Or
a simpler time, maybe.
A simpler time, yeah.
It's a vintage, I've always been saying, it's like classical vintage stuff. And there is a big appeal to a lot of that. I mean, I still love watching the old film noir stuff where they reach over and they answer the phone that was on the hook, with the dial and cradle. We actually had a dial, actual dial on the phone when I was a kid. Reach in there and dial and wait for it to slide back and go click, 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 and then you dial in the next number. And, you look at those old phones from like the 40s and 50s movies, and it's such a different time in so many ways, but it's only been one lifetime. Things change fast.
Especially, it's something that speeds up too, because my grandmother went from horse and buggy to watching Apollo landings. And although she never actually believed that it was real, she was an early. The moon landing is fake.
That is something that was. I always thought that was something that developed in the last couple of decades, but I suppose there were people at the time. Yeah.
No, she legitimately, at the time, did not believe it was real. So my own grandmother is perhaps responsible for the moon landings were faked meme. But it's amazing because within my living memory, there was someone that remembers, what it was like in the early 1900s, pre-World War I. Yeah. And all of a sudden, here we are in this amazingly rapidly changing technological civilization where it's moving much, much faster. It's exponentially so. Do you see that continuing? Do you think we're just going to keep going faster and faster with technological development?
Yes and no. I mean, I could see it cutting either direction, but the thing is, for any scientific research and progress with technology, there always has to be a motivation to do it. And I mean, you do see that right now. I still use a PC for almost everything. I just got a new phone. It's a Galaxy Note 9, and it's like, I guess, one of the best ones you can get these days. And I still barely use it. I mean, I'm still getting used to it, of course, but I do most of my work on a PC. And the reason why I do is that PC is at least 10 times faster than anything that phone can do. You can't produce video on a smartphone, not to the kind of quality that we put up on YouTube. Yet, for most people, that is enough processing power. I can burn up a whole hard drive just with clips for videos that would never fit on a smartphone. And yet, most people, the smartphone's memory and processing is more than enough for what they're doing. I think you do get to a point where people say, I don't really need this next new upgrade, and the research for it starts falling off. And we see that already with PCs is there's less revenue to be had there, so there's less effort to develop that next generation of hard drives, processors, etc. And I think that could happen to a civilization. On the other hand, the more technology you get, and it's the classic singularity, asymptotic takeoff there is, the more technology you get, the more each person can produce. And the more each person can produce, the more you have for technological research, and the more of your population you can use for that, and the more tools they've got to research with, and so on, each generation exponential climb. And the thing is, at a certain point, you're going to max out technology or it really is that there's always something new to learn thing. Once you've maxed out technology, you plateau. That could happen 10 years from now, a century from now, 100 million years from now, but there is a point where that presumably happens. I could see people getting off the train very easily, not out of techno-primitive civilization, but when they say, life is easy enough as is, I'm getting off the ship. And you'd have other people who might decide they're just going to keep riding the thing and to whatever point they're comfortable with. And that's one of the ways I can see civilization breaking up in the future is, you just have so many different places where people decide this amount of technology or this particular type of technology I'm good with. This one I don't really need so much. And say, well, if you want to be competitive, you're going to have to keep increasing. Say, but you don't really need to be competitive in a post-scarcity civilization. If you get to a certain technological point, there's no drive to learn more. We have all sorts of people these days who do not use their smartphone if they have one, or they're happy with a flip phone, or they really hate this new bit of email or technology, and they don't use it. They have every reason to want to learn it because we still run in a classic economy. You're still getting to a post-scarcity level. Where's the motivation? If you're not comfortable with a bit of technology, the only reason you have to learn it, because your life's easy enough as is if people are going to, hurt you if you don't. But I don't really see civilizations turning more violent or oppressive in the future. So I think a lot of people will choose to just get off the ship at some point.
And on that note, we'll get back into that, this idea of the singularity and post-scarcity civilizations and the realities of that, what that's going to look like. When we come back, I'm joined today by Isaac Arthur of Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur. Back in a moment.
If you'd like to support Event Horizon, you'll be pleased to know we've recently launched a Patreon. Link in the description below. Or alternatively, you can use your cellular telephone to scan the assemblage of squares on screen now. And now, back to John.
And we're back with Isaac Arthur, host of Science and Futurism on YouTube. And Isaac, we were approaching the subject of the singularity. And the singularity actually goes back a long way. It goes back to, again, John von Neumann. And that at some point, technological development moves so fast that it becomes incomprehensible and unpredictable. Do you agree with that premise, or do you think it's just no?
I don't see it as a single point. This is the problem with the term singularity has changed a lot in its usages. If you were to go back to the 1900s and you teleport someone from then to now, they'd be, they could never predict the civilization we had. You look at somebody like Jules Verne's, and those works by him are still great, and he did predict quite a few things, but so much of it's just off. And we were saying earlier that things like the smartphone, we never saw those coming, right? So I don't see there being a single moment where that happens. And, with the accelerating rate, you say, well, yeah, all of a sudden you get all this progress in 1 year. The thing to keep in mind on that is that to those folks living in that time, there's a good chance that that one objective year does not seem like an objective year to them, because they've been using this technology to augment themselves too. So their subjective period of time, they might have already augmented their minds to the point that they're running out of subjective time thousands of times faster than what we experience. So I don't think for them that would come as a big sudden surprise. And that's the biggest thing is technology does have surprise to it. Obviously, we have the black swans and so forth, but it never really seems that surprising. I don't wake up any day and say, oh my God, the new smartphone is totally revolutionary. You saw it coming a little bit, So there is that, it's certain hindsight, it makes sense, but while you're experiencing it, it makes sense too. So I don't see there being that one moment where all of a sudden everything is so radically different that you can't adapt to it.
Do you consider Elon Musk and SpaceX a black swan?
Yeah. I mean, the black swan being that nobody predicted it in advance, or nobody predicted it for the right reasons in advance, at least. Somebody says the end of the war, no one saw it coming, but the guy on the street who was holding up the end of the war sign apparently did. In that context, yeah, I would say to some degree SpaceX is a black swan, because in the 90s we did talk a lot about, privatizing the space industry, but no one's really saw it happening, especially not the way it did. And so to a degree, yeah, I'd say that's a bit of a black swan.
And I think it's one that we may not yet know the full outcome of, because not only does SpaceX do things like throw out visions of colonizing Mars, but they also talk about creating a broadband internet network based on satellites, or
Yeah.
the BFR being used to compete with air travel, where you can be anywhere on Earth, any city on Earth, and within a half an hour just simply by going into space.
I would say that has to be, that have to be considered a bit of a marginal case, because the key on a black swan is that nobody is really predicting it in advance as a realistic possibility, but they might be predicting it as very likely. If someone would say this election was a black swan, say, well, no, a ton of people obviously did think it was going to turn out the way it did. A lot of people were talking about privatization of the space industry as a realistic possibility prior to SpaceX. So, or putting up a wireless network around the Earth that everyone could use anywhere with a satellite grid. So maybe not a black swan there, but a lot of knock-on effects of that. Again, the cell phone itself, not a black swan. People predicted that we'd have, walkie-talkie equivalents of phones before in advance. But the smartphone, yeah, that would have to be considered one, because nobody saw this. In the 60s, we were talking about satellite grids and cell phone networks. Nobody saw you playing a Facebook Candy Crush Soda Saga game on your phone while you were in the dentist's office.
Right, yeah. The idea of essentially what was once would have been called a supercomputer can be held in your hand. And the cultural effects that come from that, like the games and, memes and all of these things that come across, that assault us every day, that we see every day. You couldn't have predicted that, but you could have predicted things like the internet, I think.
Yeah.
But how it would actually manifest is where the question was.
I think of in science fiction of a lot of stuff. They say one day we'll have a network of people can talk to each other instantly, and something like Wikipedia that they predict stuff like that, or those hive minds people are always so fond of with when telepathy was a very popular thing in sci-fi. I don't think anybody saw, YouTube coming out of that. I don't think anybody saw your Facebook, These were surprises. And to a degree, you can say this was a surprise because that's how you get one company that's kind of got monopolized. If people see it coming, then a lot of people be in that industry. Although we did think there'd be a lot. It wasn't that long ago that Amazon was a place you went to buy books, online. And look at that now. They're as big as like Walmart. Even Walmart was a bit of a surprise back in the day. So you do have these just highly disruptive bits of technology that people maybe saw them coming, but even when they did see it coming or something close to it, it still ends up as a black swan because we never saw it developing the way it is. And in that regard, the concept of a singularity having the unpredictable events in the future, yes. But I think this specific singular asymptotic curve, I don't think that's quite right. But the idea of just mini black swans in a row that make it impossible to realistically predict the future culturally, oh, yeah, absolutely. It's something we always keep in mind when we're doing the channel Science and Futurism is that we can predict certain things in a general sense, but the specifics, no. That one, no, we can't really do. And so we'll often paint a portrait where we say, if everything else stays the same but this one technology, here's how it would do it, just so we can explain that technology. But it would say with Dyson swarms, everyone will live in our rotating habitat in the future. That goes out the window completely. For instance, everyone decides they want to go digital, or we all grow food in a vat and, we use virtual universes to entertain ourselves. Yeah, so the concept has to be adjusted for the technology, and we can't predict how that will happen,
Now, interestingly enough, one of the things about Enterprise that most intrigued me was this idea of the Xindi, where you have a planet that eventually produces multiple intelligent species. And, we did that collaboration on uplifting, but even removing uplifting, where you augment, an elephant to be human level intelligent, barring that, you still have this possibility that eventually some of these animals, if we last long enough, could be as smart as us, like the dolphins. The dolphins may only be 100,000 years behind us as far as intelligence goes and evolution of intelligence. So do you see this planet eventually being an abode of intelligence, a producer of intelligence?
I think so. That's actually an interesting. We don't know where intelligence came from, but we know that a lot of the earlier human civilization, the cousin races, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, some of the others, were very intelligent and probably could have learned a lot of the stuff. And in fact, we probably inbred with them, which we didn't used to think that was the case. You always would say if one race comes first to intelligence, it dominates the entire planet. What do you do if a whole bunch of ones that are decently related but divergent enough to be very, they can't breed together anymore? What if they all hit that intelligence point about the same time, and then one of them gets that technology, a few 100,000 years later, but the others are actually smart enough to learn it? Right now, all the other ones we deal with, dolphins, elephants, they're smart, but they're not smart enough to grasp technology. You could easily have a place where somebody, they weren't smart enough to get it on their own, but they were able to learn it. That could result in some very strange cultures popping up. But then you've also got what if they help the others get small, the uplifting case. I could see us uplifting dolphins or dogs or cats, and then, after you did that, 1,000 years later, they are part of society as a separate and not a pet race anymore. And that would be a very hard trick, I think, for them to do too, because initially you'd be used to your cat and your dog as, subservient to you. And, well, at least your dog would be subservient to you. I suppose cats would be a little bit of a different story. But, when they do get to be part of a functioning civilization where they're just as smart and just as accepted as everybody else, you could have something like where the Zindi had it, where it was, 5 or 6 different races that were all essentially co-equal. When you have uplifting going on, we have biological enhancement, genetic enhancement, cybernetic enhancement, artificial intelligence coming into play. If we approach this where it's one of those things where it all turns out well, everybody's civilized and ethical, you could easily have Earth as this spawning point for hundreds or thousands of effectively separate intelligent races. We were talking about, if you go traveling out in the universe far enough, you're eventually going to bump into aliens because you made them. But that doesn't have to just be in the galaxy. That could happen in your own solar system or planet.
And it becomes a question eventually of ethics because you have physiological ethics. Mm-hmm. A dolphin cannot harness fire, use tools, use a computer. It just does not have the physiology. It's got fins. But if it is on level with a human being in intelligence, are we not morally required to uplift them and help them and get them out of the ocean and bring them into our society? Or do we say, no, and this we won't have to ask this question for 100,000 years, but you have to wonder at some point, you cannot leave an intelligent being in a non-technological state.
I often say with these things is that there's not always necessarily there might be the most right answer, but there's a whole spectrum of reasonably decent, mostly ethical answers. And it tends to be that humanity falls down on something pretty ethical in the end, but not necessarily the most ideal one. I don't know that we have a moral obligation to uplift intelligent species to have technology, but I don't think we have an obligation not to either. So I would say I can't, I'm a teacher by nature. If you give me an intelligent person to be around, I'm going to try to teach them stuff. And I think that would be what tends to rule out. And so you would end up uplifting these guys just because you have people who would want to do it. Whereas the people who don't want to, they're going to have a serious ethical challenge trying to explain why they're preventing somebody from making an intelligent technological elephant. So I think it would end up happening one way or another, but I don't know that you're really ethically obliged to do it either. It's like, I don't believe in the Star Trek Prime Directive, but I wouldn't get on a race that did practice that. If they don't want to get involved, that's their choice. As long as they're not making me not get involved myself. And that's exactly why I tend to think Prime Directive things wouldn't last very long, is because you might have a civilization that says we're not going to interfere with other cultures, but there are going to be some members of that civilization who are, and unless you're willing to throw them in prison or execute them, they're going to do it eventually.
Well, and the case could be made too that it would be individuals. One dolphin may say, "No, I don't want your technology. All I want is herring." Yep. Or you could have another one that says, "Yes, I want to be part of human society. I'm a human at heart." So you come across individuality within intelligent animals.
They're all things we would say as a group or as a species, you make decisions, but by and large, decisions of an ethical nature are something individuals make or small groups make. And if somebody comes by and says, look, we came across this race of monkeys on Vega. They're almost as intelligent as us. They're like the chimpanzee, and we're going to uplift them. And I say, well, if you guys want to do this, if you're doing it ethical, I'm not going to stop you. And so he comes by and says, I am going to stop you. We don't need the competition. That's kind of you can start a war over. And I don't think most people would be willing to pull that trigger. How far are you willing to go to make sure humanity is the only species out there? And for me, the answer is not very far at all. I would welcome other intelligent life that wasn't openly hostile to us. And the advantage of the species that are forced on the scene is that you usually don't have to worry if they are hostile because you have a big edge. So,
right, and as we covered again, if you start running across species on ocean worlds where they are forced to remain in an ocean and they cannot do anything technologically, but they're intelligent. And
someone is going to go and talk to them and try to uplift them, and I'm not going to be willing to stop them. So I think if you come across those, it's less a question of whether you're ethically obliged to as well or not you're willing to stop anybody who does, because someone is going to interact with them and say, look, these guys deserve to learn this. And there'll be members of their species who are happy to learn that. And so now it's happened. They've got what they need to do this. They're uplifted. What are you going to do about it if you don't like it?
And you get into a situation where if they're in danger and their sun's luminosity is increasing and it's about to boil them, you have to. You're obliged to. Someone is obliged to help them.
Not everyone's going to feel you're obliged to. You'll have some people say, no, this is none of our business. But that doesn't matter. What matters is if somebody's willing to. And it's not a question of, oh, there are a lot of them. It's, are you willing to stop them? It's like with the Fermi paradox. We say, not everybody's going to want to colonize the galaxy. And it says, well, no, not everyone's going to want to colonize the galaxy, but some people will. Unless you're willing to shoot their ships down, it doesn't matter if you don't want to or not. Some species might be 99% in favor of staying at home. That 1% wants to go out and colonize the galaxy. They're going to do it unless you stop them. There is a big difference between saying, I don't want to colonize the planet, or I don't want to uplift people, and saying, I'm willing to bomb the people who are. So someone sees a sun getting hot and says, look, there's an intelligent civilization or a thriving system on this planet. It's going to get toasted. I am going to stop that. I'm going to help them. And say, well, okay, that's your choice, because I'm not willing to kill you over it, even if I disagree. And of course, I'd be one of the people who would want to rescue them. So that might bias me, but I can't imagine a lot of people being willing to bomb a planet to prevent them from uplifting the people who live there.
Yeah, I mean, it's anthropocentric of me to say that I would want to help them. Of course, there's could be a machine civilization that says, no, I am not interested in biology at all. Mm-hmm. They can have their water world and they stay there.
Sure. But that's where we get the exclusivity concept. There probably would be civilizations out there. Seems there'd be people out there who would say, no, leave them. All right? And, no, that's their choice. They're not actively killing anyone. They're just not helping. But if they have members who do, or there's another species, another machine civilization that says, no, that's not the way we walk. We're going to give them a hand. Unless you're willing to stop those folks, then it doesn't matter that there's a civilization that would sit on the sidelines, because there's another one that would help.
Now, we have in this solar system, we have one water world, we have Earth, and we have two that may have once been, one certainly was, the other one may have been water worlds, Venus and Mars, but we have tons of ice shell moons. We have tons of possibilities for liquid water underneath a shell of ice, which might suggest that most of the universe is locked in ice oceans and presumably unaware of the universe at large. You
could conceivably evolve technology while you're living in an ocean buried under ice, but I don't think it's too likely to happen. And if you come across a species that's small, and there was a feedback loop, you evolve something because it's useful. You don't evolve a big brain just because you have a big brain. So maybe they don't have that level of intelligence. But I think if you came across a planet where you found intelligent squid living under it, like on Europa, we come across intelligent squid, I would want to talk to them. I would want to interact with them. I would want to introduce them to science and technology. And I would not want someone to stop me from doing that,
I wouldn't either. I don't think we're going to find that. My gut sense is if we find something at Europa, it's going to be microbial. But if we did find something that is more than microbial or complex, my God, is that suggestive of what's out there in the universe? Because if it evolved independently, say the chirality is completely different or something like that, this is not life that was planted by Earth. Then we know that the universe is probably teeming with complex life.
Yeah.
Whether it gets to intelligence is another question, of course, but it does tell us. Or if we see something like we see a vegetative red edge in, searching for biosignatures, we see clear evidence of complex plants existing on an exoplanet. As a matter of fact, there was a recent paper about that where they speculated that we might actually be able to tell things like that from albedo measurements on exoplanets. So it could be, but the real question is how far can life go and how far can it develop? And eventually, though, it seems almost like, at least with Earth, intelligence is the end game. And that you end up with, as long as you have a landmass, you end up with things like dolphins, elephants, and humans, and chimpanzees. The list goes on. Birds.
I mean, it's hard to say for sure that everything converges towards intelligence, but I think once you get to a certain level of intelligence, you're all going to get that escalating role. Whereas this, the language, communication. I said, what is the big advantage of writing? It allows you to create a hive network, networked intelligence that actually includes dead people because you got their writings in the past. There is a certain point where I'm sure it escalates. I don't think you get to basically history like we have 4,000 years ago when we started writing. I think once you get there, you are on the pathway where you will definitely get to technology, advanced technology. Before that, I'm not sure. That's one of the things we're just going to have to find out. I think technological civilizations are real, but whether that's because almost nothing gets intelligent or gets multicellular or gets eukaryotic, that one we won't know till we start going out there. And it might turn out that almost every system has life in it, but almost none of it has, things as small as an elephant or a raccoon. Or it might be that there are millions of planets in the galaxy with raccoon or elephant level intelligence or chimpanzee intelligence, and it just doesn't get technological. That's the big question mark we're going to have to answer.
So let's end this conversation out with the far future. Say we live in a universe where intelligence becomes increasingly common as time goes on. But eventually we get to a point where the universe begins to, for lack of a better term, die. And we're looking at things like iron stars and
black hole forming.
Black hole, yes. These things, these speculative things that we might be able to do to keep civilization going. But eventually an end comes. So do you see a future where humans and dolphins and all of these things we have, these possibilities with planet Earth that we have, do you see a point where we're just like, this is the end, and everybody says goodbye and goes away? And if we did that, if we hit that point where we're all just, maybe we find aliens and they're involved too, and we're all just sort of collecting up red dwarves and trying to hold on as long as we can, or we're collecting hydrogen or resources or whatever we can do. What does the end of the universe look like to you for, let's term it consciousness?
The one cool thing about a scenario, when you have a dwindling universe where the stars are dying off and that's how you live, people might start getting desperate towards the end. Others, if you've been around as a civilization for billions of years, you are probably very good at surviving and very focused on surviving. So you could get some very nasty wars for resources towards the end. But on the other hand, with things like black hole forming or iron stars where you're running on these tiny amounts of energy, in those you actually get more energy towards the end because things start evaporating away and giving off more energy. And you actually don't get that last draining pause where everything would be a last gasp, but rather you get a big boom at the end. And so I think that you might actually just have civilizations going out on a bang. They're not desperately trying to kill each other off for one more day, but rather they are celebrating at the end because this is the end. We've all known it was coming forever and a day. We've spent 1 trillion years trying to find a loophole. We haven't found it, and it's time to go. And I think in that kind of context, you do get the New Year's Eve kind of party environment, maybe. And at least I prefer to think of it that way. How you live life and how you end life are, the very related questions. And, you're going to end at some point in time. And I think how you go out is pretty important, even if there's nobody there to record it. So I would like to think that everybody would have plenty of time to think about how they want to end, and they would do it in a way they felt respectful, as opposed to trying to cloud one more day of life by cannibalizing each other. But that's one of those things where how the universe will end, we still don't know yet, and how those civilizations work, we can't say yet. But for my part, I like to think things that have been around for 1 trillion years have probably had a lot of time to come to terms with their ethics and who they are. So hopefully in a civilized fashion. So
the human civilization spent its last bits of energy to keep YouTube videos alive. And on that note, Isaac, thanks for appearing with us. I hope you'll come back, and it was a great conversation, man.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yep. 1 million subscribers, man. It's coming for you. I know it. But what of the very far future, where the very concept of resources changes in a universe that has very little left? Say humanity somehow survives for the entirety of the remaining time the universe has left. Say we sail past the dangers of AI, virtual reality, highly advanced biotechnology, and even contact with other civilizations. There is some thinking that as the universe ages, intelligence will become increasingly common in the universe. But it would be beyond isolated, as the expansion of the universe makes distances ever greater. But within our own galaxy or local group of galaxies, might many civilizations arise in the future? Might we create some of them through uplifting? I wonder if at the very end of the universe, the civilizations of the Milky Way, or at least what's left of it, might band together, or even become a single culture, made up of what was once many different species from many different worlds. In such a scenario, humanity wouldn't be alone, far from it. And perhaps the one thing left binding everyone together is that it is inevitable that the universe will, for all intents and purposes, come to an end. Might this also play out in other areas of the no longer observable universe? Islands of ancient civilizations holding out until the very end. And now it's the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to draw the winners for the book giveaway. I have my new hat ready with all the screen names of the applicants in it.
It's basically a pirate hat, John.
Yeah, I bought it for Halloween, but it was late arriving, and it's better than a random number generator.
You didn't even wear it. You just wanted a pirate hat. Besides, my random number generator is leaps and bounds ahead of your outmoded analog.
You aren't picking comments at random, you're picking comments you like.
Yes, picking comments I like. At random.
Anna, stop. This is my book giveaway. And number 1. Anthony C. Number 2. Strychnine. Number 3. Craig Locklear. Number 4. Alex Glumsas. And the final name is David Gardner. To claim your prize, email producer@eventhorizonshow.com for further instructions. And one last thing, for those that didn't win, I can offer a consolation prize. My first book, The Salvagers, will be free to download for anyone with the Amazon Kindle app this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and if you missed that, one of my plans this coming year, time permitting, is to record an audio version of The Salvagers and its prequel in my own voice and give it away in its entirety in installments for free here on YouTube one way or another. I'll keep you posted, and my guest next week will be Dr. Seth Shostak to talk about SETI, the possibilities of intelligent life, and even machine civilizations. See you then.